I stepped out that morning to find my driveway blocked by an HOA fence, erected overnight. Karen, our power-hungry HOA president, stood there with her clipboard, smirking. "You can't use this driveway anymore," she declared. "This is HOA policy now." I froze in disbelief. Was this a joke? "If you don't fix your driveway to our standards," Karen continued, "you'll be fined $100 every single day." For years, I'd followed their absurd rules, painting my mailbox their approved blue, keeping my grass exactly 2.5 inches tall. But this was the final straw. If they want to play by rules, I thought, fists clenching, I'll play by my rules. What I did next left them speechless. I dug a massive moat around my driveway and built a fully legal drawbridge that drove the HOA absolutely insane. Let me introduce myself. I'm just an average guy who values peace and quiet above all else. 3 years ago, I bought my dream home in Oak Ridge Estates, a charming suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and what I thought would be friendly neighbors. As a software developer working remotely, all I wanted was a tranquil place to code, enjoy my coffee on the porch, and live without drama. I'm not the confrontational type, I often told my friends. I just want to enjoy my little slice of paradise without bothering anyone. Little did I know that my slice of paradise came with a hefty side of HOA nightmare. Enter Karen Thompson, 50-something, with a perfectly highlighted bob that never moved an inch, even in strong winds. As HOA president for the past 8 years, Karen ruled Oak Ridge Estates with an iron fist clutching a designer clipboard. Every morning at precisely 7:30 a.m., you could see her patrolling the neighborhood, her hawk-like eyes scanning for violations, her pen poised to write citations. "That's Karen's 4th lap today," my neighbor Tom whispered one Saturday as we both worked in our front yards. "She's already cited the Johnsons for having their trash can visible from the street 2 hours after collection." The HOA under Karen's leadership had evolved from a community organization into something resembling a small dictatorship. The rulebook, originally 10 pages when I moved in, had ballooned to 47 pages of increasingly absurd regulations. No vehicles could be parked in driveways for more than 4 hours during daylight. All driveways must be resurfaced every 2 years, regardless of condition. Holiday decorations could only be displayed for exactly 14 days and only in approved festive colors. For 2 years, I managed to fly under Karen's radar. I followed the ridiculous rules, attended the mandatory HOA meetings, and paid my dues on time. I painted my mailbox the exact shade of Oak Ridge blue, a color that, mysteriously, could only be purchased through Karen's brother-in-law's paint shop. I kept my grass at precisely 2.5 inches tall. I even planted the approved varieties of flowers in my garden beds. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, official HOA letterhead, with Karen's signature scrawled dramatically across the bottom. The notice claimed my driveway was below community standards and needed to be completely resurfaced within 30 days. Failure to comply would result in a $100 daily fine. I stood in my driveway, coffee mug in hand, utterly bewildered. The concrete was in perfect condition. I'd had it sealed just last year. There wasn't a crack, stain, or imperfection to be found. "This has to be a mistake," I muttered, running my hand over the smooth surface. I decided to ignore the letter. Surely, this was some kind of clerical error, or mix-up with another address. I had more important things to worry about, like the major project deadline looming at work. That was my first mistake. 3 more letters followed, each more threatening than the last. The final one included photos of my driveway with red circles around problem areas that were completely invisible to the naked eye. When I finally called the HOA office to dispute the violation, Karen herself answered. "The committee has made its decision," she said coldly. "Your driveway doesn't meet our standards. Either resurface it with our approved contractor at a cost of $8,500 or face the consequences." I later learned that the approved contractor was Karen's cousin's company, which charged 3 times the market rate. And that brings us to that fateful morning when I stepped outside to find my driveway blocked by an HOA fence, with Karen standing there, clipboard in hand and victory in her eyes. What she didn't know was that she had just declared war on the wrong homeowner. The morning after the fence appeared, I woke to find an official HOA violation notice taped to my front door in a bright neon orange envelope that my entire neighborhood couldn't possibly miss. Inside was a $100 fine for failure to maintain driveway standards and an additional $250 for attempting to circumvent HOA authority by trying to access my own garage. I crumpled the paper in my fist, my blood pressure rising with each passing second. This wasn't just about a driveway anymore. This was harassment. By day 3, the fines had doubled. On day 4, they tripled. Karen made sure to deliver each notice personally, always around 5:30 p.m. when neighbors were returning from work. Maximum visibility, maximum humiliation. "You know, most people would have given in by now," she remarked on day 5, tapping her manicured nail against her clipboard. "The longer you wait, the more expensive this gets. We're up to $1,750 now." I remained silent, which only seemed to fuel her satisfaction. On day 6, I found a large red sign hammered into my front lawn, "Community hazard property in violation." 2 neighbors crossed the street rather than walk past my house. Another couple slowed their car to take pictures. The following day, an official-looking document appeared on my windshield, despite my car being parked in the street, not even on the disputed driveway. "Your vehicle is subject to towing as it belongs to a property with outstanding violations," it read. The substandard driveway at this address represents a community safety hazard and environmental concern. Environmental concern? My perfectly intact concrete driveway was now somehow threatening local wildlife? I'd had enough. That evening, I drafted a detailed email to the entire HOA board, attaching photos of my driveway from multiple angles, close-ups of the surface, and even measurements showing it met all county code requirements. I requested an emergency meeting to resolve the situation. 3 days passed. No response. I decided to rally support from my neighbors. Surely they could see how ridiculous this situation had become. I knocked on doors up and down the street, careful to be polite and reasonable. The responses were telling. "I'm sorry about what's happening," whispered Miss S. Rodriguez from across the street, constantly glancing over her shoulder. "But last year I spoke up at an HOA meeting, and the next day I had violations for my garden gnomes, my bird bath, and even the color of my window trim. I can't risk it, mister." Jenkins, 2 doors down, was more direct. "Look, I sympathize, but Karen's brother-in-law is on the city council. Her husband golfs with the police chief every Sunday. Pick your battles, man." Even Tom, who I considered a friend, could only offer a helpless shrug. They cited me last month because my trash can was visible for an extra hour after collection. Cost me $200. I can't afford to cross them. Desperate, I consulted with a local attorney who specialized in property disputes. After reviewing my HOA contract and the growing stack of violation notices, he leaned back in his chair with a grimace. "Unfortunately, You did sign an agreement giving the HOA authority to enforce community standards, he explained. While I think their interpretation is excessive, courts tend to defer to HOA judgments unless you can prove discrimination or gross negligence. So they can just block access to my own property? I asked incredulously. It's a gray area, he admitted, but fighting this could take months and cost thousands. Most people just comply. Just as I was leaving his office, my phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor. Karen's at your house with workers. I broke every speed limit getting home. There, in my driveway, stood Karen supervising two men installing an even taller fence, this one with a padlock on the gate. The original barrier had been reinforced and extended, now completely blocking any access to my garage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, slamming my car door. Karen's smile was ice cold. "Protecting community standards. Since you've refused to address the violation, we're ensuring no vehicles can damage the substandard surface further. This is my property," I shouted, my composure finally breaking. "Actually," she countered, waving a document, "your contract gives the HOA easement rights for maintenance and enforcement." Section 7, paragraph 3. As if on cue, a police cruiser pulled up. Officer Daniels, who I recognized from community events, stepped out looking uncomfortable. "We received a call about a disturbance," he said, avoiding eye contact. Karen immediately stepped forward. "This homeowner is threatening HOA personnel, who are conducting authorized enforcement activities." I was speechless. She had planned this entire confrontation. Officer Daniels took me aside. "Look, I understand you're frustrated, but this is a civil matter. The HOA does have certain rights according to your contract. I'd suggest working it out through proper channels." As he left, Karen stood by her fence, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. She thought she'd won. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced my house, reviewing every document I had signed when purchasing the property. There had to be some loophole or limitation to their power. At 3:17 a.m., bleary-eyed and caffeine-fueled, I found it. While the HOA had extensive authority over permanent structures and aesthetic standards, there was a clause about temporary modifications for property protection. Specifically, homeowners retained the right to implement reasonable temporary measures to protect their property from damage or unauthorized access. I dug deeper into county regulations and discovered something even more interesting. Residential properties were permitted to install water features and decorative landscape elements without prior approval, provided they didn't affect neighboring properties. A plan began to form in my mind, audacious, possibly insane, but completely legal. I grabbed a piece of paper and began sketching. By sunrise, I had detailed drawings, a materials list, and a timeline. What I was about to do would either solve my problem once and for all, or escalate this war to nuclear proportions. Either way, Karen and her precious HOA wouldn't know what hit them. The next morning, I was up before dawn. My phone buzzed with a text from Marco, the contractor I'd hired the previous evening. "We're all set. Crew will be there in 20. I smiled, sipping my coffee as I watched the sunrise from my kitchen window. Today would be different. Today, Karen would learn that even the most patient person has their breaking point. At precisely 6:30 a.m., 3 trucks pulled up to my house. Marco's team of 8 workers, all wearing bright yellow safety vests, immediately began unloading equipment. The noise was considerable, and deliberately so. By 6:45, the jackhammers were breaking ground around the perimeter of my driveway, creating a precise 3-foot-wide trench. Neighbors' curtains twitched. Doors cracked open. Someone was filming from across the street. Perfect. By 7:15 a.m., The excavation was well underway. The team worked with remarkable efficiency, as if they were enjoying this unusual project just as much as I was. The trench gradually took shape, a perfect moat surrounding my driveway, with a single gap at the entrance where something special would soon be installed. At 7:28 am right on schedule, Karen's silver Lexus SUV turned the corner. I checked my watch and smiled. Her morning patrol was nothing, if not punctual. Her vehicle screeched to a halt in front of my house. She emerged like a tornado, designer sunglasses barely concealing her fury, clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, marching toward me but stopping abruptly at the edge of the trench. I took a leisurely sip from my coffee mug. "Good morning, Karen. Beautiful day, isn't it? You can't do this. This is destruction of property. This violates at least 15 HOA regulations." She was frantically flipping through pages on her clipboard, her hands shaking with rage. "Actually," I replied calmly, "I'm not destroying anything. I'm installing a water feature and security system to protect my property from unauthorized access. Section 12, paragraph 4 of the County Code permits temporary landscape modifications for property protection." I handed her a laminated copy of the permit I'd obtained through an emergency online application the night before. The county clerk had been surprisingly sympathetic after seeing my photos and documentation. Karen snatched the paper, her eyes darting across the official seal and signatures. This can't be right. The HOA has to approve any modifications, not temporary ones for security purposes," I corrected her, "and especially not when the HOA itself has created the security concern by illegally blocking access to my property." By noon, the project had advanced considerably. The trench was now lined with waterproof material and partially filled with water. At the entrance to my driveway, Marco's team had constructed a wooden drawbridge, rustic yet sturdy, attached to an electric winch system that could be controlled from my smartphone. Neighbors gathered at a safe distance, watching in amazement as my medieval fortress took shape. Some were openly laughing, others were taking photos. A few gave me subtle thumbs up when they thought Karen wasn't looking. Karen had retreated to her car to make frantic phone calls, but returned every 30 minutes to take photos and issue new threats. By mid-afternoon, she was practically apoplectic. "The board is calling an emergency meeting tonight," she announced, her voice cracking with stress. 7 p.m. sharp at the community center. "You'll be hearing from our attorneys." I nodded pleasantly. "I'll be there. Thank you for the invitation." As she stormed off, I turned back to Marco. "How's the security system coming along?" He grinned, pointing to the 4 high-definition cameras now mounted strategically around my property. "All set. Motion detection, night vision, cloud storage, the works. And we've installed the signs as requested. The signs large, professional, and impossible to misread. Private property, protected by security cameras. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law." By 6 p.m., my medieval fortress was complete. The drawbridge worked flawlessly, raising and lowering at the touch of a button on my phone. The moat gleamed in the evening light, stocked with decorative koi fish and water lilies, a beautiful water feature by any definition. Solar-powered lights illuminated the perimeter, giving the whole setup a rather magical appearance as dusk fell. I straightened my tie, grabbed my leather portfolio, and headed to the community center for the emergency meeting. The room was packed. Every homeowner in Oak Ridge Estates seemed to be present, an unprecedented turnout for an HOA meeting. Karen sat at the front table with the other board members, her face a mask of cold fury. "This emergency session of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association is now in session," she announced. banging her gavel with unnecessary force. "We are here to address the outrageous violations committed by the homeowner at 1742 Oak Ridge Lane." For the next 20 minutes, Karen presented a slideshow of my property, describing my moat and drawbridge as a grotesque eyesore, a safety hazard, and a malicious attempt to undermine community standards. She cited 17 different HOA regulations that I had supposedly violated. When she finally paused for breath, she fixed me with a triumphant stare. "The board recommends immediate removal of these unauthorized structures and fines totaling $15,000 for willful violations. We will now take a vote." "Point of order," I said, standing calmly. "I believe I'm entitled to present my side before any vote is taken." Karen's smile was venomous. "You have 5 minutes." I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I'll be brief." I clicked through my own presentation photos of my perfectly maintained driveway before Karen's harassment began, the escalating notices, the illegal fence, and finally, my permit for the temporary security measures. "Everything I've done is completely legal and within my rights as a homeowner," I explained. "But that's not why we're really here tonight." I clicked to the next slide. The room fell silent. During my research into this situation, I discovered some concerning financial discrepancies in the HOA records. The screen showed bank statements, invoices, and check images, all obtained legally through public records requests. Over the past 3 years, more than $87,000 of HOA funds have been paid to Thompson Property Services for various maintenance projects. Interestingly, this company is registered to Karen's husband. None of these contracts were put out for competitive bidding, as required by our bylaws. Karen jumped to her feet. "This is slander! That company provides excellent service at fair rates." "Perhaps," I continued, clicking to the next slide. "But what about these payments to Oak Ridge Consulting, $4,500 per month for administrative services?" This company is registered to Karen herself, yet there's no mention of this conflict of interest in any board minutes. The room erupted. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions. Karen's face had drained of all color. And finally, I said, raising my voice above the din, "There's the matter of the $32,000 renovation to Karen's personal residence last year, coincidentally performed by the same contractor who's been designated as our approved driveway resurfacer, paid for with HOA emergency funds, and classified as community center improvements." I placed a thick folder on the table. "I've provided copies of all documentation to every board member. I've also forwarded these materials to the county prosecutor's office and the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division." The chaos that followed was spectacular. Board members huddled together in panicked whispers. Homeowners surrounded Karen, demanding explanations. Someone called for an immediate vote to remove her from the board. Through it all, I stood quietly, watching 3 years of neighborhood tyranny crumble in real time. As the meeting dissolved into shouting matches and impromptu voting blocks, I slipped out the back door. I had said what needed to be said. The rest would take care of itself. Walking home in the cool evening air, I pulled out my phone and tapped the app. In the distance, I could see my drawbridge slowly lowering, welcoming me home to my castle. Karen's reign was over, and my driveway had never looked better. The morning after the explosive HOA meeting, I awoke to an unusual sound: laughter. Children's laughter, to be precise. I peered through my bedroom window to discover a small group of neighborhood kids gathered around my moat, pointing excitedly at the koi fish swimming lazily beneath the surface. "Can you make the bridge go up again?" one boy called out when he spotted me watching from the window. I smiled, grabbed my phone, and obliged. The drawbridge creaked upward to delighted gasps and applause. This, I realized with some amusement, was not how I had expected the aftermath to unfold. The fallout from the meeting was swift and decisive. By noon, an email had been sent to all residents announcing Karen's immediate resignation from the HOA board for personal reasons. No mention was made of the financial improprieties I had exposed, but everyone knew. The neighborhood gossip network operated with remarkable efficiency. 3 days later, a moving truck appeared in front of Karen's house. She supervised the loading process with rigid posture, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed by. No one offered to help. No one stopped to say goodbye. As the truck pulled away, I noticed Miss S. Rodriguez, the neighbor, who had been too frightened to support me, initially standing on her porch. Our eyes met, and she raised her coffee mug in a subtle toast. I nodded in return. No words were necessary. Within a week, the remaining HOA board members called for another community meeting. The atmosphere couldn't have been more different from the previous one. People chatted amicably, sharing snacks and drinks as they waited for proceedings to begin. After careful consideration, announced the interim president, a retired accountant named David, we've decided to dissolve the current HOA structure and start fresh with a more limited scope. The new community association will focus solely on maintaining common areas and organizing social events. All restrictive covenants regarding individual properties are hereby suspended pending review. The room erupted in applause. Someone popped a champagne bottle. Additionally, David continued when the noise subsided. All outstanding violation notices have been nullified, and collected fines will be refunded within 30 days. More cheers. A woman I barely knew hugged me. Finally, David said, "We'd like to thank our neighbor for bringing these issues to light. His courage has given us all an opportunity to rebuild our community on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than fear and control." The spotlight of attention was uncomfortable, but the genuine smiles and nods of appreciation from my neighbors made it bearable. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I truly belonged here. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. My medieval moat and drawbridge, originally built as an act of defiance, became Oak Ridge Estate's most beloved landmark. Families would stroll by in the evenings specifically to see it. Children would ask permission to feed the fish. One elderly gentleman even brought his grandchildren from out of state to see the castle house. The local newspaper ran a feature story about it, complete with photos and an interview in which I carefully avoided mentioning Karen by name. The headline read, "Moat Valuable Property: How One Homeowner's Creative Solution Became a Community Symbol." Tom, my neighbor who had once been too afraid to support me, helped me install benches beside the moat and plant flowering shrubs along its perimeter. Miss S. Rodriguez contributed decorative lanterns for evening illumination. Mr. Jenkins, the retired engineer, designed a small waterfall feature that kept the water circulating and fresh. What had begun as my personal fortress had somehow transformed into a community gathering spot. 6 months later, I received an official letter, not a violation notice, but an award from the city's Beautification Committee for Most Creative Landscape Design. The irony was delicious. I still lower my drawbridge each morning and raise it each night, not because I fear unwanted visitors, but because the neighborhood children delight in the ritual. They've named my house the Unbreachable Fortress, and I've embraced the title with good humor. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I sit beside my moat with a glass of wine, watching the sunset reflect off the water. I think about Karen, wondering where she ended up and whether she's found another neighborhood to terrorize. I hope, for her sake and others, that she learned something from all this. As for me, I've learned that some battles are worth fighting, not just for yourself, but for everyone who lacks the means or courage to fight themselves. My moat remains not because I need protection anymore, but because it stands as a whimsical reminder that sometimes the most effective resistance comes not from anger, but from creative defiance and unwavering principle. And every time I press that button to lower my drawbridge, I smile, knowing that I've turned what was once a symbol of conflict into a bridge that brings people together. So, what did you think of our epic tale of neighborhood warfare? Was justice served in the most satisfying way possible? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had your own run-in with an unreasonable HOA or encountered a Karen who made your life difficult? Perhaps you devised your own creative solution to deal with neighborhood tyranny? Your stories could be even more dramatic than this one. Share your experiences in the comments below. The most outrageous story might inspire our next video. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this neighborhood revenge saga. And if you're new here, subscribe now to catch all our upcoming stories of everyday heroes standing up to unreasonable demands. I post new content every weekday. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. The next one might just give you the perfect idea for how to handle that difficult situation in your own life. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best revenge is not just living well, but living creatively.